Well, thank you, Rameen, for joining us for this Q&A. Really appreciate your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Great. Got lots of questions. I think one of the feelings about retail media networks is that you plan your media out for the year. It's kind of fixed in stone, but the reality is you have quite an agile approach to how you invest your media spend across the networks. Is that correct?
100%. I think the thing that's most important, not just for our organization, but for all CPGs, is investing wisely and where you see your greatest return on investment. One of the things we do as a team and as an organization is ensure that where we are putting our media dollars will have the biggest return for us. And as a key principle is always understanding what the size of prize could be, and then reverse engineer what you need to spend as a minimum to test what you can return back.
So it's very much more about a return on investment prediction. Is there much brand awareness or other metrics or softer metrics when you're considering that investment, or is it very much hard metrics?
I think for myself and our e-commerce team in particular, we see retail media as part of almost performance media, and by that I mean you can technically you can monitor things like awareness, reach, impressions, but when you're essentially driving sales as part of your sort of deliverables as an organization, for us, ROAS is a key KPI. And it's something that we, on a weekly basis, monthly basis, monitor and make sure if we are seeing fluctuations and drop-offs in ROAS and increase in elsewhere, we can move the budgets in a fluid direction.
And do you feel that, I mean, performance is never going to be completely equal across all your retail partners, and how much difference do you actually see? I mean, obviously the shoppers can be quite different from one platform to another, but in terms of some of the different levers that you can pull and affect different performances, how consistent or inconsistent is performance across some of the networks?
I think you're right. It really does vary. Some retailers have a higher traffic on their retailer websites, similar to footfall in store, right? And what we are trying to achieve as an organization is to ensure we're present where our consumers are shopping our categories. So similar to share of market, share of e-com, share of digital shelf, we optimize where we think essentially we could gain the most revenue and most return. I think again it depends how you split the insights you have. Let's say retailer X is 40% of e-commerce, has millions of eyeballs on their retailer website in a week. We would increase the investment in that area in comparison to a retailer that has less consumers visiting their retail website in that week.
Okay. And in terms of how you go about planning budget and where that budget responsibility sits in your organization, obviously you work for a very big global food manufacturer with lots of sales and marketing and account managers for specific trade customers. How coordinated is that, or is it a case of I don't know, is there infighting at any time to actually sort of secure that budget, and who's ultimately responsible?
It's a very interesting question. So I think within CPGs and particularly within food, it's still an ongoing debate as to where retail media budgets should sit and who the owners should be. We are fortunate in a sense that our senior leaders are bought into e-commerce and digital performance as a strategy and as a winning channel. So we've got quite fluid and dynamic budgets. As long as you can prove that where you're investing generates the right investment return, you can allocate spend. The way I see it, and what I always try and instill in our team is treat media dollars like your own money. you wouldn't invest in something that's not going to deliver long-term consistent growth. Be the same with the budgets that the business allows us to allocate. So we've got this, I'd say it's ongoing test and learn culture. If we can go away and prove something works, the senior leadership organization will allocate budget and resource where needed.
And you mentioned ROAS as being, I guess, the single point of truth, I guess, but it sounds like you've got lots of other KPIs that you think about when you're building out your campaigns. And I guess, do those KPIs differ from partner to partner or network to network?
Yes, I'd say definitely they differ from partner to partner. I mean, within, let's say, a certain retailer, your general share or your share of search might be less than the other. You may organically appear further up the digital shelf in one retailer than the other, and technically speaking, retail media has a positive impact on your digital shelf, and it also has a positive impact on your bottom line. So if you're driving consumers to add to basket, but also if you measure digital shelf metrics within your organization, you can see a correlation between investing in those key search terms or key subcategories within a retailer, and then measure that against your benchmarking tool to see a like-for-like benefit. But I think for us as an organization, one of the things that I've recently started to see, and it's of no surprise, conversion rate and click-through rate whilst on promotion is far better than whilst off promo, and especially within a inflationary market where consumers are price sensitive, that's always something to monitor.
Sure. And like, obviously there's been a lot of focus in this presentation around paid media opportunities, but organic listing is very important. Organic strategy is important. Definitely. As much as really good creative, I presume.
100%. And I think if you we pride ourselves as being leaders in flavor, experts in blends, the leading herbs and spices manufacturers in the UK and also globally. And I think the same applies to ensuring that our content inspires consumers. We run multiple A/B tests. We assess our imagery to ensure it's content compliant for the retailers, but also that it's optimized for different formats, whether that's mobile, laptop, desktop, etc. And also just from a general consumer searchability point of view. So ensuring your PDPs are SEO compliant, and monitoring what consumer feedback you have through ratings and reviews on multiple retailers. I think it's really key. And where you can use the insights that you have to feed back to the relevant stakeholders internally. Share that with marketing, share that with category teams, and essentially using your relationships you have with retailers to lead that category expertise from a digital shelf perspective as well. I think that also benefits your positioning organically, so whether it's taxonomy, search, etc.
And one of the big threats to all branded manufacturers like yourself is obviously the rise of own label. How are you approaching that this year, specifically on the digital shelf? I guess, is it a case of just communicating the value of your brand versus own label, or are there other things that people can do?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. I think it differs category to category. Price sensitivity is a significant challenge in 2023 and has been for a number of years now. And I think as brands and as experts in our categories, the best thing we can do is to ensure that trust in consumers, give them that sense of why we are worth paying more for. And it could be anything from sustainability to sourcing to taste and flavor. We're dependent on what category you play in. There are multiple levers that brands can use to leverage their brand comms. And I think one of the things that for me stands out, private label is available in the majority of categories across food. But what's interesting is retailers aren't necessarily investing in driving those through their own media channels, which gives brands the opportunity to do that. It's also seen as a revenue stream for the retailer, but I think that's where the main differential is. Brands are willing to spend more above the line, whereas retailers are providing an offering to the consumer to make it an even playing field.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually, and one that's not really being discussed much, is that own label's probably doing pretty well offline versus online, actually. Yeah. And that's the opportunity, right, for digital shelf.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think even from like a wider marketing piece, you won't see retailer X advertising in digital screens or out of home opportunities, because the focus is just providing that alternative option. Whereas brands have got huge marketing teams, digital capabilities, significant budgets depending on, again, their categories that they play in, and there are ways we can excite and entice the audiences that we resonate with.
Right. And so I've got one final question for you, and it just seems that there's so much buzz around retail media at the moment, and every retailer's becoming an ad network, right? And I guess it was Walmart that led the way in the US, but what are your predictions for this year?
I think in a sense the term buzzword is spot on. We'll probably all look back at this in a few years' time and say it was another hype that we all got behind. Technically, for the time being, I think what it's clearly showing is retailers are learning how they can commoditize their owned platforms. So it's almost retailer X is the next Google. The more they build their capabilities, the more they partner with these ad tech platforms, the more investment opportunities that there will become over time with brands like ourselves. And I think it's set to continue until it becomes, the norm. I know certain retailers are coming into this area, and I think it's going to be competitive which of these ad tech platforms wins in the long game. I think it's an opportunity for brands to really, understand this area, invest in upskilling their teams, and really spend some time into figuring out whether there is more benefit investing in retail media than focusing on above the line. And by that I mean, if there are X number of millions of consumers shopping in a specific retailer, and that's where the eyeballs are, or that's where the footfall is, from my perspective as a commercial manager, that's where I would invest. And I think, especially because we're in a climate where organizations have to be tighter with budgets and be smarter with their investments, I think it's something that's set to continue.
Just from conversations I have with food brands, there always seems to be like this choice between investing in DTC versus Amazon versus now retail media. And retail media still is quite nascent, right? They still haven't quite got the head around the opportunity versus plugging away at DTC. I mean, what do you think will happen eventually between those three choices, let's say?
It's a great question, and I think again it really does depend on the objective of the organization and their strategy as a whole. I think with Amazon, not necessarily all brands play there. I know there's specific. I mean, Amazon themselves have challenges from what you can see in the media. But what is clear is the bulk and the majority of brands are focusing on retailers because that's where they're largely present. That's the traditional relationships they have. That's where they've got their distribution, etc. And the spend at which people are spending, from what I'm seeing, people are spending millions in direct retail media planning, which technically isn't an investment to the retailer itself. So I would expect more brands to invest in a indirect media, whereas Amazon is the money's going direct to Amazon, right? So I would expect more brands to start measuring like the end-to-end commercial benefits of their advertising and focus on which revenue streams is actually delivering the bottom line for them.
And just finally, those supermarkets that haven't invested in e-com, are the ones that have actually done pretty well over the last sort of 12 months or so. And do you feel that they will invest and they see all these dollars flowing through the Tesco's, the Asda's, the Sainsbury's, the Ocados, and they'll want some of that? And so we might see an acceleration towards e-com from those guys, or do you think they'll just continue to do what they're doing?
Potentially. However, just based on the challenges we're seeing in the market, which tends to be all around price at the minute, I think there is probably much more of a focus on being price competitive. And there has been, post-COVID, there has been that normalization of the share of online, and we saw a slight stagnation post-COVID in terms of penetration. So I would expect the retailers to focus predominantly on price and less about e-commerce in 23. I think the ones that have made the shift and moved into retail media, it looks like they're going to continue that. But I don't see the ones that haven't moving into this space anytime soon.
Well, thank you so much, Rameen. It's been really insightful, and I appreciate your time again. And
thanks very much.
Look forward to chatting to you again soon. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much.